glazes. Exactly what is a glaze? Well, it's actually, a glaze always goes over a finish. And it's a way of either doing one of two things in my world. You're either going to accent with it or you're going to deepen and enrich with it. Now, typically, a glaze is used to enhance. And a prime example of that is to take a darker glaze over a lighter color, and you use it to either enhance some type of antique look, whether it be distressed or whatever the case, or you're using it to create a color effect. And by that, what I mean is you could take a tabletop or whatever, for example, and you could take a glaze and go around the edge of it and darken it a little. You can also take it, and that's a pretty good look, and like in a raised panel, you've got your door or whatever it is, one color, the center of the panel's a color, and then you just glaze around the profile and it darkens it a little bit. It's kind of like framing that panel. Glazes can be used to hide a few ills too. But with that said, one of the things I want to caution you on, glazes are not to be used as a filler. Now, by and large, glazes are typically a thick, heavy-bodied product. Here's one from General Finishes. It's a water base. And it's a thick, heavy paste consistency. But that's not the only way a glaze is used. Now, what I've got here, and throughout this whole series, where we're finishing projects, and as we're doing them, you're going to see me glazing all the time. Now, here's a piece of plywood that I simply took some General Finishes cinnamon dye, smeared it on it, didn't bother with blotch control or nothing. Kind of put it on and shot a coat of water-based finish over it. Now you can see it's pretty gnarly, nasty. I got a few spots there I missed. Now obviously this isn't something you want. But the reason I did this is to kind of show you how a glaze can help it. I'm just taking a 320 scuff pad here and I'm going to scuff it. Now one of the things the glaze will do is it can help us to even out a color. Now what I've got here is some cinnamon dye. It's the exact same dye I put on here. So the difference here, it's water-based, but the difference here is that I've got the coat of finish. So I'm not going to get the absorption I would like a dye would. Now you can see we're leaving a very light, we're not doing a really dark, we're not darkening it that much. But what we're doing is it's making the color even, and it helps to enrich the color. And if you got a little occasional sand through or whatever, it'll often help with that. Now we take the same panel, and this time what I'm going to use is a little bit of, this is in general, it's Van Dyke Brown. Now there's a lot of different companies make them, but glazes. Now, if I take the brown, and I hope this will show up pretty good on camera, I'm actually darkening a little bit. It almost looks the same, but it's not, it's darker. Now, I'm going to be real honest. I don't care for the water-based glazes. They don't seem to hang on the surface as well. Now here's another one. Now this doesn't say glaze, but what this is simply a gel stain. And it's an oil base. Oil base hangs better on the surface than a water base. Now the other thing with a glaze is because that finish is under there, you can leave as much or take as much or leave whatever you want. But you can definitely see how that darkened it. That actually took this cinnamon and it gave it, and the color I'm using here is Java. It's a really popular color for a glaze, and I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. But what it did to this is it gave it more of from a red to a burgundy. So glazes, you know, you can, and like I said, you can use about any color. Now, one of the things that I need to caution you on, I told you I really like the oil-based glazes, or actually, for the most part, I use the gel stains. The problem is using a water-based stain over it. If you've got a thin coat of, and I'm going to be specific in this, in the general finishes, because I know how that dries. And you leave it on 48, 72 hours, you could do a light scuff and put a water base over it pretty safely. The issue is, where I've seen folks try to take that thick glaze and work it into a crack or work it into a open knot or something like that. The problem with that is that you've got this mass of material in here. It's going to take forever to dry. And you put a water base over it, you could have adhesion issues. A simple good rule of thumb is, if you use the oil-based glaze, dust a little coat of shellac over it if you're using the water base. If you're using solvent base, you don't have that. If you're using an oil finish, you want to make sure again that the oil base gel stain dries well, because if not, your oil can try to soften it and pull some of your color. So just let the glaze dry well. And don't try to get real heavy with it. Now the other place we use glaze, and I talked about accenting texture, is a good term, I think. Now on this piece of poplar, you can see how it's with that one coat of finish on there, and I'm working it into this swirly grain, and I can kind of get an effect. But on this edge, and I gnawed this edge up. As most of you know, I enjoy doing what I call freeform, and I like barking them. Meaning, if I'm doing a freeform slab, a lot of times I don't have a free form. I'll take a piece of wood and cut it into whatever shape I want. Then I come back and nibble up the edges, and I quote, bark it. Now this is a case where you could very easily get too much material. You've got all these deep nooks and crannies. So when you put it on, you want to make sure you take a good brush because you don't want to leave a big gob in there. That's what you don't want. I'm wiping it off and I'm just going back over it. You know, you can use also, you know, you can use latex paint and take some water and wipe it back. And all I'm doing is wiping this off. And you can see what I'm doing. I'm creating a, you know, the dark background with the light front, kind of giving it a bark look. This is something I like a lot. Now, just for information, if you're using an oil-based gel stain as we are, and it starts to set up on you, or you need to remove some of it, you can either use naphtha or you can use mineral spirits. Now here's one with a little bit more, and I don't know how well we're going to be able to see this because we didn't tear this up really well. But what it's doing, it's still kind of hard to see. There we go. Can you see the ridges in this? This is where the surface was hand planed. And it's going to kind of, and what you're kind of going to have it do is hang a little bit on those edges to kind of accent that plane mark. Now again, this is where we're looking to antique something or whatever. And there will be some videos at some point where we're actually antiquing something, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But again, glazes, like I said, rarely do I do anything I don't glaze it. Now, there's some cautions. If you're using shellac and you've got an acetone-based or alcohol-based stain, you don't want to use that as a glaze because it's going to melt it. If you're using a water-based or a gel stain, they're going to be compatible over anything. They're just not going to. But again, if you're using oil finish, now you got to let it's the same thing. I told you you got to let the oil-based glaze dry before you put an oil over it. By the same token, you want to let, if you're putting an oil down as your finish, your first coats, you want to let that dry really well before you put the glaze over it. Oils dry slower, so you got to give them a little bit of time. And don't get big, heavy buildups of it. Now that said, there's nothing to say that you can't glaze it, put a coat of finish on it, and come back and glaze it again. I do it all the time. You know, and I mean, I've had, you know, and you'll see some of this. You're spraying, you're finishing something, and you know, everything looks pretty good, but you know, here's a rail or stile on the door or something like that, for whatever reason looks a little light. Well, I'll just glaze that part of it. And, you know, bring my color in. Nothing wrong with that. It works really well. Again, if you use water base, make sure that the oil base is dry. And again, a smart thing to do, put just a little ½ pound, cut a shellac over it, seal it in. Bottom line, no, if you ever have a question whether something's going to be compatible and you question adhesion in any way, shellac's your answer. It's a bond coat. It'll take care of either one. All right, that's glazes.